Hey, welcome, it's Steve. This is a video that I've wanted to do for quite a long time. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I didn't do it I didn't have time for one of the reasons. I was doing some other stuff. But then the other day I was on LinkedIn, browsing LinkedIn, and a post came up from a surgeon in the US that showed a picture of a sign on a door that basically said, reps not welcome, reps have to go around and use another door. And there was this huge amount of comments that came from it for thanking the surgeon for support, criticising administrations, talking about the reps are underappreciated, etc., etc. And this is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And you'll see the title of this down below, which is Reps Should Be a Thing of the Past. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but this is going to upset some people. And it's going to hopefully be thought-provoking and get you to think a little bit different about what the role of the rep is in the world. And how we've created our own problem in industry. And how I believe that industry has to sort this out. I think that AdvaMed and medtech Europe and other bodies need to start giving companies guidance on the way that they send their people to interact with healthcare professionals. And I'm not talking compliance. That's just a given. Everyone should know compliance. There should be completely compliant behavior all the time. I'm talking about how we structure ourselves as a professional body in the industry. Let me roll back a little bit and just make sure that I put some context around this of why I say the word reps. So reps in much of the world and in many hospitals around the world is absolutely a dirty word. Reps is spat out by a lot of administrators and a lot of purchasers in a really negative, terrible way. Let the reps wear red hats. Give the reps the paper gowns. They can do their own thing. They have to go through VendorMate and TrackMate and all these different things around the world. They don't like reps. Now, reps, we have to remember, is a short word for representative. And I think that's obvious to most people. But the problem is, what does representative mean? Well, it means somebody who comes to represent the company. So the CEO, in a way, is a company representative if they turn up. But they don't get dissed. They don't get asked to often do VendorMate. They don't get asked to do these hoops. I'm sure that the CEO of Zimmer doesn't have to wear a red hat in certain places. I think they get treated with a little bit of reverence. Yet they're a representative. So technically, they are a rep. Now I talk about this because I was a rep for a long time, starting in the late 80s, early 90s at Johnson & Johnson. And I think that whole period of the 90s was the start of the downfall of reps. I think this is where many of our problems today come from behaviours that happened in the 90s and the early 2000s that spill over today. I think the world was a different place then as well. So I was and this is the word that I think bugs most of the administrators and the purchasers in hospitals, which is sales rep. And that is what has got the dirty connotation. And when you say rep, people think about skulky, suited, or even worse, in the US, you can do it, you can't do it much in Europe, but wearing your own theatre scrubs, where you prowl the corridors, you try and ambush doctors, you try and ambush surgeons, and what you try and do is then do your sneaky little sales pitch to them to just try and get the competition out. You get your sale, and it's all for that commission. And that's another thing I'm going to talk about, which is our structures in the industry are disgusting in some ways. So where do I want to start on this? So I think what we've got to do is we've got to understand, potentially from the customer's point of view, and I don't mean the surgeons. The surgeons will see reps in a very different way, depending on how the rep acts. But I want to get into that. But let me first of all start with this sort of 90s skullduggery of a percentage, the 5% rule. 5% of reps were often really bad. And we've all heard stories, and they were true. I have seen this, where reps would put things like staplers up in the top of false ceilings so that they had to order more. Reps back in the 90s had access into the storerooms. They could do stock takes. They could basically just get small pads and they could order on behalf of the hospital in some cases. I mean, I used to order on behalf of several hospitals. I was honest and I kept them honest. But you kind of open that up to abuse, and it's those few abusive cases that got the ire of the purchasing departments who would say, why have we been getting these $1 million of stapling products in here when we don't use them and need them? Where have they all gone? Then there was orthopedic reps that were very pushy, etc., going in. And there was over the 90s, there was a growing distrust of the company representatives, especially the sales reps going in. And there was the way that this kind of works, and it still happens today, is there's often the selling process can happen at the site of patient care. And you have to ask yourself, is that correct? Should I be allowed, while the surgeon is really trying to concentrate on an operation, should I be selling them directly or indirectly on a product and trying to get them to adapt? And again, in the 90s, I could walk in with a bag of staplers to a US surgical account and I could say to a surgeon, hey, do you want to try one of these today? No training, no traceability of the product. I could literally pull it out of my demo bag, rip open the stapler, and they'd get a free stapler and they'd do the case with it. And quite often I would be in there firing the stapler for them. That was just how it rolled in the 90s, back in the early 90s, unbelievable as it may seem. And for the surgeon at that point, they were getting a free stapler. Even the OR manager would be fairly involved in this because it was, they got a free stapler and the surgeon was deciding to use it anyway. So what's the harm, right? No harm, no foul. But if you think about that, you look at that in the context of 2025, it's absolutely insane that untraceable product that was sitting in reps' cars for months often, some of it expired. And I know I was in cases where I saw reps pull out expired product and it was caught at the last minute. This kind of Wild West banditry went on for a long time. And then what would happen is you would often, and I'll talk a lot about the old training protocols. So in the companies, the rep would go in, convince the surgeon, get the surgeon all lathered up, as we'd say, get them really excited, sell them at the scrub sink, sell them at the table, and then go down to the OR manager and say, hey, let's change some of these staplers from this vendor to this vendor. And this was a lot before contracting, a lot before tenders became a really important thing. But what would happen is that the sales rep, would be doing their sales job in the OR, and they would get systems to change, and you would get fragmentations of purchasing. And often the purchasing department were just told by the OR manager or by the surgeon, you need to order some of these. And quite often I would go down as the sales rep, and this happened all over the world, and you'd go into purchasing and you'd hand them like a pink slip of paper and you'd say, that's what you need to order for the surgeon. They want some for their cases next week. And this is where I think the disaster started to happen regarding reps. So you basically had reps in there doing a clinical sales job, features and benefits, clinical selling, and at the same time, what they did was they were in there trying to sell, and they were rewarded for selling. So they got their commission check for selling. So it was quite aggressive. And I can tell you in some areas of medical devices, it was hyper aggressive. And I know in the orthopedics, it was very hyper aggressive in some areas of the world. I think it still is today. Spine, knees, different areas. But it would be very aggressive. And this was combined with the rep would take the surgeons away for a bit of a jolly. They'd have a good meal together, some wine. They'd go on a training course, have a really good time, or they'd see them at a congress, take them out for a good dinner, take them for rounds of golf. And the rep was kind of doing this dirty, underhand selling job where they were convincing people through bribery. That's how it was perceived. And this is before a lot of the rules and regulations came in place. So the impression of reps, and not all of them, was that they were these dirty, underhanded salespeople that would use these tactics and would use the pressure of the surgeons, who had power in those days, to force a change in the purchasing behaviour of the hospital. And the last person to told about this was often the purchasing department, who were just told, you will order this. And often by the reps, they were told, hey, just order this. Not a discussion. I've already had the surgeon, and if you don't like it, you can talk to them and they will tell you that you need to order it. So this whole friction was set up in the 90s, in the mid-90s, late 90s and 2000s. And then there was a big change in the way that purchasing was done. It was moved to centralized GPOs. It was moved to contracting. The hospitals had professional purchasers come in. Because remember, a lot of the purchasers in the hospitals in the past were ex-nurses who were not professional purchasers, and there were not the systems in place. So then they started saying, look, hey, we're not going to allow this anymore. We're not going to allow these reps to wheedle their way in and do this anymore. So over the years, there's been a strong fight by the administration to get this whole purchasing thing under control. And in my mind, for a lot of them, there was a huge amount of payback where we will show these reps, we will show these companies they do not have the right to just waltz in here. We will show them they don't have the power with the surgeons. We do as the purchasing. The corporation of the hospital decides, not some low-life scummy rep who comes in here, buys them some dinner, buys them some wine, and gets the way that they want it. And that was the whole transition that started to happen. And as you brought in more and more professional purchasers from different industries, there were rules and regulations put in place. There were value committees like VAT committees put in place. And there was a whole set of red tape put in place to stop this kind of Wild West changing of products, breaching of contracts, pricing not under control, wild pricing across the country. And as more and more networks got built up and hospitals could see into the purchasing at other hospitals, they say, well, why are we paying $100 when they're paying $50? This doesn't make any sense. And it was often down to the relationship of the rep. So you can see how from the corporate side of the hospitals, it wasn't looking great the way that the interaction was happening with the reps. Another thing that was happening was there was a lot of legal cases where people were prowling corridors, getting into neonatal units, stealing babies, that was the sort of things. And then often as well, reps would be in sites of patient care. So you had to have background checks if you were a healthcare professional, but you had no background checks at all if you were a rep. I could have been an absolute criminal and gone in there and been working with patients. There's no background check, no controls, no regulations. They didn't even know if I was capable to be in there in a safe manner and not contaminate the field. So we had to start getting training about operating room or theatre training, as it's called in some countries, to be able to be in that operating room and be safe and be part of the team. Then as we added timeouts in, timeout, who's in here, what's the rep in here, what's the job? Then there was a set of lawsuits that happened where reps were, in the old days, I used to fire stuff. I used to be part of the procedure. Quite often we'd be asked to do settings because we knew the system the best. And I'll talk in a minute from the other side of the table on this. And then what happened was there was a couple of high-level cases where reps changed settings on stuff and patients got harmed. There was lawsuits, and then companies just said, whoa, we don't have reps anymore actually involved in delivering clinical practice, physically or even giving advice. You shouldn't be giving clinical advice. You should be giving only instrument and product advice that you're trained to do. So the whole level of scrutiny went up and up and up. And what happened is that there were more and more procedures put in place, codes of conduct. There were training courses about anti-corruption. There were training courses about compliance. There were training courses about how you act in the operating room, scrub courses, etc., etc. Then on the product side, there was much more product traceability came in, so that every product now has to be traced into the system, out of the system. The way that boot stock or car stock was often done, it should now be banned because it's considered a warehouse, and unless it's part of your quality system, you've got to be very careful of how you deal with that. Yeah, I do still see people carrying products into hospitals without the right paperwork and things. So generally from the hospital side, there was this chaos, and they've put in rules and rules and rules. Then there were things like, we want to identify who these people are. So you had the vendor mate and the rep tracks, and you had to go in, and reps can't stalk the corridor without the hospital allowing them in. And you can only come in with special permission, and you can only come in if you've been vetted and validated, which we pay for. But then again, so do healthcare professionals. If you want to be on a registry of nurses or a registry of surgeons, you pay for it. So I'm not actually against that. Injections, tests, swabs, MRSA, the whole thing. And it was all about making sure that the patients were protected from that 5%. Plus, you did have those really rogue reps who were terrible, and some of them still around today. And if you're watching this, you are one of those rogue reps. If you know who you are, and I could probably come and find you. But they have ruined it for the other 95% of the people, and it's gone too far one way. So I'll stop there for a minute on this one, and that's talking about it from why the customers see it. And I do believe that the customers eventually don't want any reps in there at all. I think they absolutely don't want you selling at the table. They don't want you disturbing surgeons or ambushing them in the corridors. And I think that from a professional practice from the medical device industry must also stop. And this is where we get conflated. Because if I saw all those comments on that LinkedIn post, the surgeon was saying, the administrators don't understand the value that you bring. The administrators don't understand that you're there, at midnight bringing in the sets and the kits. They don't understand that especially on the orthopedics and especially on the trauma, they don't understand the value that you bring in. And I think that the administrators, many of them don't, because we've done a really shitty job as an industry explaining our roles. I think that training courses have become more professional now. And I think that when people go on a training course, it genuinely is a training course, not a golfing spree. And I think that's really, really good. There's a lot more compliance going on. Still, some of it's broken. And as an industry, I beg you to work with your surgeons. I beg you to work with your teams. You have to remove any of this non-compliant behavior, because eventually the industry will get punished for this, either at an individual level or as an industry level. I believe that the reps were bringing massive value. I can tell you, in the early days, in the early days of laparoscopy, if I hadn't have been there would have been patient disasters. And I think that still happens today. I think people today, a lot of the robotics cases that I've been in, if there wasn't the team from the company there being in the robotics case couldn't happen, especially in the early learning curve. There's so much value that the reps bring in. But this is the problem. At that point, when they're being in there as a clinical advisor, they are not being a sales rep, and you shouldn't do it. So in one of my companies, I banned the role, or I separated the two roles from who did sales and who did the clinical case support. And the reason why I did that was I did not want, under any circumstances, selling to the teams or having motivation to make bad calls because they were comped on it, and we'll talk a lot about comp in a minute. But I didn't want to have the people who were selling mixed with the people who were doing clinical support. And I think this fundamentally is a massive issue in our industry, and not for everyone. There are really good sales reps who do amazing clinical support, and in their brains they can separate the two things. And when they're in the OR, when they're in the clinical environment, they are not selling. They are there for pure case support and to make sure that the patient on the table gets the best quality of care that they can get. A lot of the administrators won't get that. Purchasers won't get that because they don't spend time in the OR. A lot of the comments saying they don't come and spend time in the OR. That's your fault as a surgeon. That's your fault as an industry, that you don't invite and get those purchasing people to come in and see the criticality of the products that they use in the OR. One of the main tactics I used in the past was to have administrators, purchasers, buyers, CFOs, and I would get them into the OR to the most difficult cases where they were using the products, so that they could see with their own eyes why saving 10 cents on this would be a scary prospect if it goes wrong. That's on us as an industry. It's on you as surgeons. If you don't invite your administrators in and you don't have a good relationship with them, having them see in the OR, they don't appreciate the difficult shit that you do every day, the decisions that you make every day, the life and death decisions that you make every day, the importance of the quality of products, the importance of the availability of products, the importance of the fact that, some things need to be disposable versus reusable, or reusable versus disposable. Why a robot is an amazing investment. Have you taken them in and shown them a laparoscopic versus a robotic? All things that we as an industry, we should encourage when we work with the administration of the hospital. And the clinicians should be doing every day is to encourage their non-clinical colleagues who've not got a clinical experience to come in and see what they're actually dealing with when they make these contracts. That's on you. I'm just telling you that's on you. So you have this clinical support, and if that was to go away tomorrow, I tell you, a third of operations would stop. Not all, but about a third of them would stop, or maybe not stop, but they will be done maybe in a less safe way, because some of this new technology that goes in there is so hyper complex. Put in there a multi-arm robot that's brand new on a learning curve where the staff are learning, the circulating nurses are learning, the surgeons are learning, everybody's learning. You really want the best level of technical support that you can get in there. You want proctors in there, you want preceptors in there, and you want the company staff in there, but as clinical assistants, i.e. they're helping with the product to make sure the clinical case goes well. Then what you want is a commercial team that is a professional commercial team. There's some people that can be good at both. I was okay at both. But a professional commercial team should be talking to the hospital as a business to business. It's no longer a rep to surgeon sell. And I know that there'll be some cardiac surgeons out there saying, well, it can be because we have the power. You're a bubble. There are some orthopedic surgeons out there. You're a bubble. You're not the norm in the healthcare industry of the power that clinicians have to determine the purchasing practices. So if you're sat there as a super high-end surgeon who's got lots of power in your hospital, great, fantastic, have at it, but that's not the norm. I'm talking here about the 98% of the world. So I think that the commercial teams need to be professional business-to-business commercial teams. And I think, again, this is what I'll say, the individual rep owning a hospital is insanity on so many levels. So first of all, from an industry point of view, and this is why I never allowed in my later years there to be a rep that owns the account. And I'm going to see a load of people in there who are really old school industry people like me. So don't say I'm not, because I am, but I changed. I had a moment of clarity. You have to think of it from a business. So a business to a business. Okay. And a lot of this is on relationships. And I'm talking now of the risk to a business. So if you're a CEO of a company or a COO or a CFO, allowing your rep to own that account is so dangerous for you as a company, because the relationships can go so deep and so strong that if somebody's at Stryker and tomorrow they go to Biomet, and all your non-competes have gone, remember now. So Stryker to Biomet, they take the account. Because no one's got that account. They don't own that account. We have to work as a business to business where the company has the relationship with the account, and there are several people within there with different roles. And that, again, why if you split out the commercial team from the clinical team, immediately you've divided that risk into two. You've turned that risk into two, because you've got at least the clinical, if the sales rep, the commercial rep disappears off, the clinical team still has that relationship at the clinical level, which is very powerful. Or if the clinical team goes to another company or leaves or retires or whatever, you still have the commercial relationship in there with the surgeons, but more so with the C-suite of the hospital. And again, I think commercial, it just needs to be done at a professional level. Selling at the bedside is not a professional way to sell product. And I know that we have purchasing teams and contracting teams, but I'm talking about account management. We need account management teams. And if you think about it, as devices become more connected and more complex, you start to deal with many more departments. I mean, when I was a rep back in the 1990s, flogging my staplers, as it were, I didn't have to deal with a chief information officer. They didn't exist. right? You want to plug your system anywhere now into a hospital, you will have to work with the chief information officer or whoever is that equivalent that does the IT infrastructure. You can't do that. If people are talking to you about the way that firewalls work or the way that data flow works or the way that the interfaces with the network, you need a professional to come in there. So that's why we need account teams now. And it can be a small account team with just a clinical and a commercial, or it can be a bigger one, something like a surgical robot, where you have a clinical team, you have an education team, you have a clinical trials team that interfaces with them. You have a commercial team, so you have somebody who's actually doing the commercial business from a financial side, somebody who's doing the strategy for the hospital of how that 7-year plan is going to work, and you'll have an information team that'll come in. You might also then have a CSSD team, or a sterilization team that has to come in, because there's complex sterilization of your equipment. They may even need to change and buy different equipment. How you do this as one rep is beyond me, and it's just not going to work. And the future is not going to work this way. So when I say reps should be a thing of the past, I mean the classic role of the sales rep going in and doing the sell and the clinical support. Let me talk a little bit here about how when you break this also, you have to change the reward structure. So notoriously, our reward structure is often based on commission based, which means the more that you sell, the more commission that you get. I think this again, and I've been a strong advocate for this, and this has caused lots of fights with lots of people. I do not believe that anybody should be comped on sales revenue directly. Now let me make this clear. If you are just sold on what you sell, you have to look at how your motivation is aligned with your reward. If we were to have clinical people in the operating room where they're not comped on how good the quality of the procedure is, how sticky the procedure, how much the technology is continuously then used on the patient, outcomes, whatever it be, that you can look at many different indicators for this. But surgeon satisfaction, OR room satisfaction, are they happy with your level of support? Are they happy with the way that your company has interacted with them? Are they happy with the way that the clinical support has been done? Is more important, surely, than the sell. Because if you sell and they think that your product is shit and your support is shit, that's all coming back to you. Yet we would pay people money on the sell, which is nonsense. Think about this as well. When you pay people on revenue, you are paying them on a lagging indicator. You're paying them on the after the fact, did they buy or did they not buy? What has that got to do with behaviours? It just encourages people to sell at any cost, to sell your product at any cost, to sell your product at any price. And you know what? It doesn't matter if I give discounts and stuff. It doesn't matter if I go in as the hyper rep. And remember, it's the 20-80 rule. 20% of the sales team, sales reps will get 80% of your business or make sure of 80% of your success. But fuck everyone else. You know what? I'll have the CEO in here. I'll have the COO in here. I'll have these people in here. There's a training course. I'll have my 5 people on it. And if I'm a smart rep, I will suck every resource out of the company to make sure that I get my compensation check. And I'll stand there in the ring club and have my ring on the finger and be there at the awards ceremony saying, yeah, number 1, I'm the top sales rep, President's Club, yeah. Fuck everybody else and fuck the company. It doesn't work that way anymore. We have to reward people on the activities that will give good behaviours and good outcomes, leading indicators. For example, how many cases are they being done per month? A case rate ratio is a good way to do it. Because if the learning curve requires that you do 10 cases in a month and you're only doing 3, don't want to reward people on how fast they get people to the 10 cases a month. Again, not for the sales side of it, but for the patient safety, for the surgeon learning curve. There are many reasons and many indicators that you can put that are leading indicators. From the commercial side, how many calls are set up with key stakeholders? How much mapping is done of the hospital in the correct way? Reward them on that. And then the ultimate reward, and I did put this into many of my companies, is that I've rewarded people on net promoter score. So There's multi things. How well the whole company does, and that's important, which I'll come back to. And then how well also the customers, how much do the customers really think that your business, your company, your people help them, and the net promoter score. And if you don't know net promoter score, Google it, go and see how it works, and you should put that in as part of the reward structure for everybody, because happy customers tell other customers, and it becomes a virtuous circle where they say to people, hey, we're good. It also gives you massive insights ahead of the curve if your product's not working. It gives you massive insight if there are practices that are not working. And it gives you huge insight if there are people that are not working. If there are behaviors they're doing that are pissing the customers off. Then I'm telling you, a net promoter score will pick that up like that. You'll get a low net promoter score from a group. Let's just say, I don't know, sterilization. And they realize that your company sucks at helping the sterilization team. They hate your product. They never know what they're doing. They're completely lost. Well, if you dive into that net promoter score and see why the sterilization team hate you, you can dive in, and early on you can troubleshoot that. If you're just paying people on the sales, you lose all of that valuable information. Rewards are not just about how you pay and motivate people, which is very important, and people should be paid, motivated and bonused at a very good level if they do a very good service. But rewards should also be about giving leading indicators to your company of how your company is doing and which areas you need to improve on. So you can link this in a very clever way by creating a reward system, not over complex, because people can't deal with the complexity, fair and attributable, but also rewards people for acting as a team. And again, have a team in the hospital, reward them as a team. Individual superstars are a thing of the past. They are the thing that will destroy your company in the following years more than anything. One superhero who sucks all the resources will kill your overall sales, because it will demotivate everybody else. They will be selfish. They will go out, they will take all the resources. And if you did a cost per unit per rep of what it cost them to get the business, I guarantee you, not always, but the majority of your top performing reps in your company paid on revenue, those people will be absolutely the least profitable if you do a true P&L of that rep all the way through. They will be the least profitable. Not always, and I do apologize if you're one of those ones who does this in a profitable manner, in an equitable manner, in a good way, and does it that way. That will be great. But again, those top people, if they're rewarded that way, the year they have a bad year, boom, they're out of there. Why? Because they're not rewarded on activity anymore. They're rewarded on the result. And therefore, if they're only rewarded on the result and your contracting department loses a contract, why do you penalise them? They're still out there doing the calls, doing the cases, doing the support, doing the training, doing the congresses. They're doing all their job and getting their base salary. Instead, they then get penalised because you lost a national contract. That's not their fault. Of course they're going to leave your company and go. And they're going to take all that relationship with them. So there's a whole reason why I believe that reps should be a thing of the past. The individual hero rep is the worst one out there as well. And I do believe that what we have to do, as I say, is make these teams where we have a team approach to accounts, account management teams, where roles and responsibilities are split up and divided. And no one should be rewarded on direct revenue. Now, of course, eventually we need to make revenue as an industry. This is not a charity. But if you do all the right things up front, your reward will follow. That's really essential to understand. And what you want is you want 80% of your company hitting their numbers, not 20% bringing 80% of your numbers. Because if that 20% goes or fails or has a problem, your company is dead. And I see it all the time. I see companies high riding, then a couple of big key important reps leave and they just tank. You have to protect your business. The second thing as well is you're trying to align yourselves with a rewards mechanism that aligns with your customers and your customers' behaviors and beliefs. And again, if you can go to a C-suite and say, we reward our people on how well they serve you. Yes, we know that then you'll buy from us and the company will do well and they'll get a piece of the reward of the overall company revenues, etc. And be honest and clear about it. But be clear and say, we reward our people on how well they serve you, and you get to determine their bonus. You actually, if they don't look after you, and they do not serve you, and they do not uphold the promises that they made when they sold to you, you will have the mechanism in place under the NPS score that you were able to feed back, and they won't get the bonuses. So it's a partnership. We really want you two to work in partnership and love each other, because if they love you and you love them, then they're going to get a high NPS. If they look after you and you feel really, really looked after as a customer, you will give us a high NPS. And if you get a high NPS usually means they're promoters. That's why it's called promoter score. And what they'll do is a CEO from one hospital will gladly talk to the CEO of another hospital saying, we have had a phenomenal relationship with company X. They bend over backwards. If we have problems, but they fix it like that. They're always there. They're always present. They're aligned with us and they work with us. And the next thing is, you have to start thinking about this, about when you do the corporate interaction. Around the world now, there are only pockets left where a professor or a surgeon or somebody has that ability to just get whatever product or service or change of service they want. Okay? The reality is now that it's a corporate decision and that surgeons have become corporate employees. But that doesn't mean that their input should be meaningless. Again, we don't do a really good job, and I learned it from how you had to sell really complex surgical robots, soft tissue surgical robots. You had to do 18 months of committee, and it's sales through committee. And I would advise everybody to do that. And I don't mean value committee. I mean about getting a consensus committee where you interact with the higher levels of management, non-clinical. You have the surgical or the clinical or the radiologist, whoever it's going to be that you deal with, working on a really tight way where you build a change of service plan together. And I could spend a whole 2 hours just talking about how you do that. But fundamentally, the whole way that this interaction is going to work in the future is not rep to surgeon sell. So that's why rep should be a thing of the past. The hospitals don't want it. And the hospitals have relegated the reps to try and almost embarrassing them in some places. And I think that relationship needs to be built over the next 5 years, where companies, as an industry, we make statements to say to the purchasing departments, to the information departments, we try and put our position and say, we're going to change the way that we interact. And what I would love to see is that we become part of the teams again, psychologically, clinically, commercially, information teams, where we become invaluable to them to give healthcare. Because ultimately, there's only one thing in my brain that counts, and for what counts for most of you, and I see it in the comments: the patient. Because we're all going to be patients. Parents, loved ones, friends are all going to be patients. We care about what happens on the table. So how do we align with our customers, understand them better, don't just rail against them on the non-clinicals, and how do we get trust back into the industry as much as we can? And I think the first thing that we do is we get rid of reps. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you're considered a clinical support staff, okay, not of the company, not of the hospital, but of the company, but you're clinical support and you walk up and it says reps not allowed, and you walk up to the people on the desk and say, hello there, and they say, are you a rep? And you say, no, I'm a clinical support staff. I'm here to be clinically supporting cases today. I've been asked to come in and do clinical support. I've seen this firsthand. There is a completely different level of thinking. When you walk in and say, yeah, I'm the rep from Stryker, okay, you see the shutters come down. We don't do appointments for reps. Have you done VendorMate? Have you done your rep tracks? Are you allowed in here today? Does anybody know you're coming today? Because you're seen as scum by 90%. And I know you don't want to hear that. But reps on that front desk are seen as scum. And there are people whose job it is to keep those scummy reps out of the hospital because they're up to no good. We as an industry own that. You as managers of companies own that. You as sales managers stop being sales managers and be commercial managers. You own that. We own it as an industry in connection with our surgeons to raise the profile, because absolutely clinical people who've got a real deep clinical understanding of the product should be in the operating room supporting that. And as we go further forward with AI devices, with smart devices, with connected devices, with really complex robotic devices, it can't work without them in the room. So why create that barrier by people thinking, well, that's a rep just being in there? We need to be smarter in the next 5 years. And I encourage all of my colleagues in the industry to have a deep think about how you reward people. I want to scream to our industry. When you put on LinkedIn all those rah sales conferences with big prizes and the dicky bows and that's what we call them, bow ties from smoking in, I think it's called in Italy. But when you go up there, all the gala dress and the big gala thing, these giant screens and stuff, there's some purchasing person in a small regional hospital that sees that on LinkedIn and thinks, that's where our fucking money goes. That's where these thieves take our money. Think about it. Be a little bit smarter. Be smart. Don't flash all that kind of stuff up there. President's Club ring #1. Because it's about a competition of who can screw the hospitals the most in the mind of that purchasing person who's got a bitter experience about industry. And you've got to think about those few people because they're the ones that will make our industry difficult for us. Be smart. We have to change the way that we approach this. We have to change the way that we advertise this. We have to change the way that we communicate this to the community, to the hospitals, to the purchasers, to the C-suites, and to our surgeons. And our surgeons and our clinicians can do a lot for us. If they see that value, it was great to see that post by that orthopedic surgeon saying, my purchasing people don't understand it. They don't understand the value that they bring. That's your fault. If they don't understand the value that this person is bringing, and they don't understand, and they're putting barriers up, you haven't communicated to that low-life purchasing person that you have friction with what the value is. You've not done that in a good enough way. You might think you have, but you haven't. And all of the clinicians out there, all of the nursing staff, if you've got massive support from your company people who come in, reps, whatever you want to call them, I would stop calling it reps. I would just ban the word reps tomorrow. Get rid of reps. Just get rid of it. Rep tracks. We trace the reps because they need tracing. You've got to get rid of that. What I would say to our industry is we need a complete rebranding and remarketing of the interaction that we have. There are many big networks out there, the Kaisers, the HCA. They are looking at how do they ban reps from ever coming in. There are policies across the world saying no sales reps allowed in our hospital. It's coming that way. Now, we can wait until, you just keep banging our head and complaining about this and moaning about it, or we can change the way that we work, which will actually have massive benefits for the industry, massive benefits for the clinical, massive benefits for the patient, and benefits for the hospital. Change our reward system, change the way that we do teams, split the teams up. Don't risk your hospital to disappear to Biomet from Stryker because the rep's gone across. Don't do that. Don't leave yourself exposed like that. Work out smart ways of doing remuneration so that, yes, they're encouraged to go out and be successful, but what does success mean? Revenue, sales is a post-success metric. It is not the metric because it's after the event and it's binary. Whereas you've got a lot of metrics you can measure that will determine whether or not you will have that success. And if you do the right things in the right order, in the right amounts and do them well, the sales will follow. And again, you can reward them on how well the company does so you don't have individuals saying, I'm not helping them out today, got to go and do my stuff because my stuff's more important because if I don't do that, I don't get my paycheck. We've got to change that behavior as well. So aligning this with our hospitals, with the changing face of healthcare, with the changing face of purchasing, I'm going to say again, reps should be a thing of the past. Company people having roles and responsibilities with our healthcare providers in the hospital should be a thing of the future. And I leave you with that thought. And I really want your comments, and I know this is going to enrage a lot of people. That's good. I want this debate out there. This has been on my mind for a long time. Suggestions of how we do it the best way. If you are, you see yourself as a proud rep, tell your opinion. I'm really keen to hear it. But I guarantee you, if you fight that fight and keep fighting that fight, you will lose. And what I'm trying to do here is stimulate us to think about, how do we make sure we serve patients the best? We keep the orthopedic team in the operating room, giving that critical support. The trauma teams arriving on a Saturday night at 11 o'clock at night for that major road traffic incident where they're going to go in and support a trauma team. Absolutely 100%. How do we make sure that our teams go in and support new technology so that when new technology goes in, it's used safely in that first case all the way to the last case it's ever used in? These are the things that I want us to do as an industry. It's a really important, passionate thing to me. There's no one answer fits all, but all I will say is that reps, the name reps, the way that reps worked in the past, people selling and clinical at the same time, is something that should be a thing of the past. Thank you for listening, and I hope that's given you some food for thought.